Ethan Mercer had worked at Titan Global Solutions for nearly a decade. The company was a powerhouse in corporate logistics, managing high-value supply chains for tech giants, defense contractors, and pharmaceutical firms. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was stable, lucrative, and offered a clear career path. At 36, Ethan had climbed steadily from a junior analyst to a respected operations manager. He wasn't the type to rock the boat, just competent, reliable, and good at keeping things running smoothly. That was precisely why the company's senior leadership trusted him. He had earned a reputation as someone who could be counted on to keep sensitive projects under wraps. Titan Global CEO, Victor Langford, was a towering figure in the industry. Ruthless in business but charismatic when he needed to be, Langford had taken a mid-tier logistics company and turned it into an empire. His team of executives, sharp-dressed, sharp-tongued, and fiercely loyal, followed his lead with near-religious devotion. The company's rise had been nothing short of meteoric, and while rumors of shady deals swirled occasionally, nothing had ever been proven. Ethan had no reason to question any of it, until the night he stayed late to finalize a quarterly report. The office was eerily quiet after hours. Most of the open floor plan had emptied by 7, leaving only the hum of copiers and the distant murmur of a late-night cleaning crew. Ethan sat at his desk, double-checking figures on a procurement report when his computer pinged with an alert. A restricted file had just been uploaded to the company's internal cloud, a high-priority logistics manifest marked Executive Eyes Only. It wasn't unusual for senior executives to handle classified shipments, but the system had flagged this one because it conflicted with a report he had been reviewing earlier. Something wasn't matching. Ethan frowned, pulling up the previous documentation. He double-checked the numbers, then triple-checked them. A shipment of specialized semiconductor chips, used in cutting-edge military technology, had supposedly been routed through one of Titan's secure warehouses in Virginia. But the new manifest showed those same chips being sent elsewhere, to an unregistered facility overseas. The discrepancy was glaring. The official records showed them accounted for, but this hidden log suggested otherwise. Ethan felt a cold weight settle in his chest. He knew what this looked like. This wasn't a minor accounting error. It was an intentional manipulation of records. And if these chips were being funneled somewhere off the books, it meant Titan Global could be engaged in illegal trade. Given the type of technology involved, this wasn't just corporate fraud. It was potentially a violation of federal export laws. His first instinct was to shut his laptop and pretend he hadn't seen anything. He wasn't an investigator. He wasn't a whistleblower. He was just a guy who managed logistics reports. But he also knew that if he ignored this, he'd be complicit. Ethan's pulse quickened as he considered his options. He could report the irregularity through Titan's internal compliance system, but that would mean alerting the same executives who had likely orchestrated this. There was no telling who could be trusted. As he hesitated, another notification popped up, a security lock. Someone was remotely accessing the same manifest he had just viewed. The activity was traced to a restricted executive account. Whoever was on the other end knew exactly what they were looking for. Ethan's heart pounded. If they saw his access record, they would know someone outside their circle had viewed the file. And if Titan Global really was involved in illegal activity, that put him in immediate danger. He quickly disconnected from the server, closed his laptop, and forced himself to act normal. He packed his things at a steady, unhurried pace, but inside, his mind was racing. As he walked toward the elevators, he felt an unsettling presence. A man in a black suit leaning against the reception desk, scrolling through his phone. Ethan had never seen him before. He didn't wear a company badge. The man glanced up briefly as Ethan passed, giving a slow, deliberate nod. Ethan's stomach twisted. Had they already flagged him? Was someone watching him now? Stepping into the elevator, he forced himself to breathe steadily. When the doors closed, he pulled out his phone and snapped a quick photo of the shipment manifest before deleting his access history. The elevator descended slowly, each floor feeling like an eternity. When he reached the lobby, the man in the suit was gone. Ethan stepped outside, inhaling the crisp night air, but the weight in his chest didn't lift. He had stumbled onto something much bigger than himself, and now, whether he liked it or not, he had a choice to make. Stay silent and protect his career, or expose the truth and risk everything. Ethan barely slept that night. Every time he closed his eyes, the same thoughts circled in his head. Was it possible he had misread the situation? That this was some kind of clerical error? Or was Titan Global truly engaged in illegal activity? Something serious enough that it was being hidden from all but a select few. By morning, he had convinced himself that he needed more proof before making any decisions. He couldn't afford to jump to conclusions. Careers had been destroyed over less, and if he acted rashly, he could ruin his own. At work, he kept his head down, moving through his tasks as if nothing had changed. But something had changed. He noticed the shift immediately. The atmosphere in the office had always been professional, but now it felt tense. Maybe it was paranoia, but Ethan sensed that people were looking at him just a little too long before turning away. Conversations seemed to stop when he approached. The man in the black suit from last night was nowhere to be seen, but Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him. By noon, he received an unexpected email from Titan Global Cybersecurity Division. A routine system check, it claimed. All employees were required to update their security credentials immediately. Ethan stared at the message. It was a perfectly reasonable request on the surface. But he had worked here long enough to know that routine security sweeps didn't just happen out of nowhere. This was targeted. They were checking for leaks. And that meant someone had noticed the unauthorized access to the restricted file. A wave of nausea hit him. If the executives suspected a breach, it wouldn't take long before they traced it back to him. He needed to act. Instead of logging in to update his credentials, Ethan took an early lunch and slipped out of the office. He had to be careful. If he accessed anything from his company-issued laptop, IT would flag it instantly. If he searched for information on his personal devices, there was always the chance that Titan Global had ways of monitoring employees outside of work. Instead, he made his way to a small, nondescript internet cafe in the city. The kind of place where no one asked questions. He paid in cash and sat at an aging desktop in the back corner, heart pounding as he typed into the search bar. Titan Global Solutions, illegal exports. The results were disappointing. A few vague allegations from disgruntled former employees, but nothing concrete. No federal investigations. No whistleblower cases. Then he tried something different. Victor Langford, Titan Global CEO, government contracts. This time, something caught his eye. A congressional report from 5 years ago had flagged Titan Global for potential irregularities in its handling of defense-related shipments. The company had been investigated but cleared of any wrongdoing. The inquiry was abruptly closed with no further explanation. That wasn't proof, but it was a pattern. Ethan's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He needed something more specific. He tried searching for the name of the offshore facility from the secret manifest. Nothing. That didn't make sense. A legitimate warehouse, even in a foreign country, should have some record of existence. A business registration, a government filing, something. But it was like the location didn't exist. Ethan leaned back, exhaling slowly. He had seen enough to know that whatever was happening, it was deliberate. This wasn't a minor oversight. This was a sophisticated operation, buried under layers of corporate bureaucracy. Now he was faced with a real dilemma. If he went to the authorities, what exactly could he give them? He had a single document, one that could easily be explained away as a misunderstanding. He had suspicions, but no concrete evidence. Without something more substantial, his accusations wouldn't just be dismissed. They could get him fired for breaching company security policies. And if Titan Global was willing to manipulate government contracts, what else were they capable of? Ethan shut down the cafe computer and stepped outside. He needed to think. He needed a plan. Then his phone buzzed. A restricted number. He didn't answer. A few seconds later, a text appeared. Let it go. His blood ran cold. They knew. They knew he had accessed the manifest. They knew he had gone looking for answers. Ethan's breath came faster, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about his career anymore. Now it was about survival. Ethan gripped his phone, staring at the ominous text. The message was simple, but the meaning was unmistakable. Someone inside Titan Global was watching him, and they wanted him to back off. Every instinct screamed at him to listen, to pretend he had seen nothing, to erase everything from his mind and move on with his life. But he couldn't. The text wasn't just a warning, it was confirmation. They wouldn't threaten him if there was nothing to hide. That meant whatever Titan Global was involved in, it was big enough to be worth covering up. And if they were willing to intimidate him, what else might they do? Ethan's hands felt clammy as he slipped his phone back into his pocket. He needed to be careful. If they knew he had accessed the document, they might also be monitoring his movements. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to walk casually down the street, blending into the crowd. He had to assume the worst. He couldn't go back to the office, at least not yet. He had no idea who was involved. And if Titan's leadership had already flagged him, his access to anything incriminating would be shut down by now. That meant he needed to find another way in. Titan Global was a fortress of security, but even fortresses had weak points. The document he had accessed was marked for executive eyes only, meaning only a select few had access to it. If he could find out who had uploaded it, he might be able to track the source. He needed a name, a single name. A plan formed in his mind. It was reckless, risky, but at this point, there was no safe option. Instead of returning to his apartment, he made his way to a co-working space on the other side of the city. He paid for a temporary desk in cash and borrowed a laptop from the facility. The less he used his personal devices, the better. Carefully, he accessed a backdoor into Titan Global's system, one he had discovered years ago but never had a reason to use. It wasn't an official login, just a temporary cache that stored fragments of system logs before they were permanently encrypted. Most employees wouldn't even know it existed. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then a list appeared, timestamps, IP addresses, file names. Most of it was routine company traffic. But there, among the logs, was what he was looking for. User, L. Salazar. File accessed, restricted manifest, executive eyes only. Timestamp, 11:42 p.m. Ethan's pulse quickened. Logan Salazar, Titan Global's vice president of global procurement. He wasn't the highest-ranking executive in the company, but he was close enough to the top to have access to sensitive shipments. If someone was involved in illegal exports, Salazar would be at the center of it. And if the restricted manifest had come from his account, there was a chance, however slim, that he had more information on his personal devices. Ethan leaned back, staring at the name on the screen. There was only one way to find out. Salazar's office was on the 18th floor of Titan Global's headquarters. Unlike the executive suite, which had biometric security, his office was only protected by a standard keycard lock. If Ethan could get in, there was a chance he could find something. A laptop, a hard drive, even a handwritten note that could give him the proof he needed. It was an insane idea, but Ethan knew one thing for sure. The longer he waited, the more likely it was that Titan Global would cover their tracks. That night, he returned to the office. He waited until after hours, blending in with the late-night employees working on tight deadlines. He moved with purpose, carrying a file folder under his arm as if he belonged there. If anyone asked, he had an excuse ready, an urgent request from finance, a missing report that needed verification. The building was quieter than usual, but not empty. Security guards patrolled the halls at irregular intervals. Cameras dotted the ceilings. Ethan kept his head down, moving past rows of cubicles toward the executive wing. Salazar's office was locked, as expected. But Ethan had prepared for this. Titan Global used RFID keycards, convenient but not infallible. Over the years, he had seen temporary employees use a simple trick, placing a previously used keycard near the scanner while timing the entry with another authorized person. If done right, the system would grant access without registering an unauthorized entry. He waited until a janitor approached from the opposite direction, his access card clipped to his belt. As the man swiped in, Ethan casually held his old visitor's badge near the reader. The door clicked open. He was in. The office was neat and sterile. A modern desk, a locked filing cabinet, a laptop, still powered on, sitting in its docking station. Ethan worked quickly. He inserted a USB drive loaded with a silent data extraction tool, something he had created years ago as a personal project. It copied files without leaving a trace. If Salazar had anything incriminating, it would be buried in his work folders. The progress bar crawled forward. 20%, 30%. Then he heard footsteps. Ethan froze. A shadow passed under the door. He glanced at the laptop screen, only 52% complete. Too slow. He couldn't risk getting caught inside. Heart hammering, he yanked the USB drive, shut the laptop, and ducked behind the desk just as the door handle turned. The door opened. Someone stepped inside. Ethan held his breath. A shuffle of papers. The rustle of a jacket. Whoever it was, they weren't just passing through. They were looking for something. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, just as suddenly as they had entered, the person turned and left. The door clicked shut. Ethan waited another full minute before moving. He slipped out the door, forcing himself to walk calmly down the hallway, past the security desk, out into the cool night air. Only when he was blocks away did he dare to check the USB drive. He plugged it into a disposable laptop, scanning the files one by one. Then he saw it. A confidential email chain. Recipient: Victor Langford, CEO, Logan Salazar, VP of Procurement, and several unnamed executives. Subject: Alternative export routes urgent. Ethan's stomach dropped as he read. The emails detailed undisclosed shipments, rerouted to private facilities outside government oversight. Not just one or two shipments, dozens, over the past 2 years. Some of the names listed as recipients were flagged on government watch lists. This wasn't just corporate fraud. Titan Global was illegally supplying restricted technology to foreign entities. Ethan closed the laptop, his hands shaking. He finally had proof. But now, he was officially a threat. And Titan Global would do whatever it took to silence him. Ethan sat frozen, staring at the files on his screen. He had what he needed: proof of Titan Global's illegal exports. Proof that Victor Langford and his top executives were orchestrating a massive operation to smuggle restricted technology to foreign entities. But now, the real challenge began. What could he do with it? His first thought was the authorities. The FBI, the Department of Justice, someone with the power to take Titan Global down. But how? He couldn't just walk into a federal office with a USB drive and expect them to believe him. He needed a secure channel, someone credible. He considered reaching out anonymously, but that came with its own risks. Titan Global had deep connections. If someone inside law enforcement tipped them off, Ethan wouldn't just lose his job, he could disappear. The weight of the situation pressed down on him. He wasn't a spy. He wasn't a trained whistleblower. He was just an operations manager who had stumbled onto something far bigger than himself. Then his phone buzzed again. Another text. This time, a different message. You have one last chance. Walk away. Ethan's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a direct threat. They were giving him a choice. Back off, stay quiet, and keep his life intact. Or keep pushing and suffer the consequences. The decision should have been easy. But then he thought about what Titan Global was actually doing. These weren't just financial crimes. This was national security. If the wrong people got their hands on those semiconductor chips, they could be used to build advanced missile systems, cyber warfare programs, or surveillance networks capable of undermining the U.S. itself. He couldn't walk away. Not now. Ethan took a deep breath and made his decision. He needed to go public, but not recklessly. If Titan Global was willing to threaten him, he needed a fail-safe. Something that would ensure the truth got out, even if something happened to him. He spent the next few hours creating a contingency plan. First, he made multiple encrypted copies of the evidence and stored them in secure cloud locations under anonymous accounts. Then, he wrote a detailed account of everything he had discovered, along with instructions for how to access the files. Finally, he scheduled an email to be sent automatically in 24 hours to a handful of investigative journalists and federal contacts. If anything happened to him before then, the truth would still come out. Now came the hard part. Delivering the evidence in person. Ethan knew that sending the files digitally was too risky. Titan Global cybersecurity was too advanced. They would intercept anything he sent before it ever reached the authorities. The only way to guarantee success was to hand it off directly. He chose his target carefully, an investigative journalist named Ryan Calloway. Calloway had broken some of the biggest corporate corruption stories of the decade. He had exposed fraud at defense contractors, unearthed political bribery scandals, and had a reputation for protecting his sources. Ethan reached out from an anonymous email. I have proof of illegal arms exports. Titan Global. Urgent. Minutes later, a reply came. Meet me. Tomorrow. Noon. Safe location. It was set. But Titan Global was already closing in. That night, Ethan noticed a black SUV parked outside his apartment. The same one he had glimpsed near the office earlier that day. A coincidence? No chance. His heart pounded. He was running out of time. He couldn't go home. Instead, he grabbed his essentials, a burner phone, cash, and a change of clothes, and left through the building's back exit. He kept his head down, taking a series of random turns to make sure he wasn't being followed. By morning, he was exhausted but alive. Now came the final step. At exactly noon, Ethan arrived at the designated meeting point, a quiet cafe in a part of town where no one asked questions. He spotted Calloway instantly, a sharp-eyed man in his late 40s, dressed casually but alert. Ethan slid into the seat across from him and passed over a small, unmarked flash drive. Calloway plugged it into his laptop and scanned the contents. Ethan watched as the journalist's face shifted from skepticism to something more serious. No words were exchanged. They didn't need to be. Calloway nodded once. A silent acknowledgement. Then he closed his laptop and stood up. It's done, Ethan thought. Except it wasn't. The moment Calloway walked out, Ethan knew something was wrong. A black sedan screeched to a stop outside the cafe. Two men in dark suits stepped out, scanning the crowd. Ethan's blood ran cold. They had found him. He had two choices, run or face whatever was coming. He didn't have time to think. He grabbed his bag and slipped out through the back, cutting through alleyways, weaving between pedestrians, heart pounding in his chest. He reached a busy intersection and blended into the crowd. A few tense minutes passed before he was sure no one was behind him. For now, he was safe. But this wasn't over. The next morning, the news broke. Explosive expose. Titan Global Solutions accused of illegal arms trade. The headlines were everywhere. Ryan Calloway had published everything. Ethan's documents, the emails, the hidden transactions. Federal authorities were already launching an investigation. Titan Global's stock plummeted. Executives were subpoenaed. Victor Langford went into immediate damage control mode, denying everything. But the evidence was too strong. The government froze Titan Global's assets within hours. Ethan knew he had one, but he also knew he couldn't go back to his old life. Titan Global wouldn't forget. Neither would the people they had been supplying. There were too many powerful interests at stake. He packed a small bag, bought a one-way ticket out of state, and disappeared into the crowd. A new name, a new life. He had done the right thing. But some choices came with a price. And Ethan Mercer would have to live with that price forever.